Hello and welcome to today's training on child protection, safeguarding and welfare in schools. My name is Trishna Gautama and I'm currently Head of Faculty of Personal, Social, Health and Economic Education, Citizenship and Religious Studies at Stoke Newington School. The aims of today's session is to define key words related to young people keeping safe, describe your role in safeguarding young people in schools. So by your role, I mean your role as a teacher, but also your role as a tutor. Many of you will be tutors whilst you're on placement, and you will be tutors once you secure a job in a school at a later date. We'll be explaining why it is vital to safeguard young people, outline the procedures used in schools to report child protection and safeguarding issues, and we will also be looking at tips on spotting the signs of abuse and creating a safe learning environment. Now, this is just a quick whistle-stop tour of child protection and safeguarding in schools. When you are off on your placements, you will have training on child protection and safeguarding, and you will be notified of the procedures in that school. In this session, we are going to be looking at quite sensitive topics. So if at any point you feel you need to pause the video and revisit and come back to it after you've had a breather, please do feel free to do so. So let's start off by looking at our key words. What do schools mean by safeguarding, child protection, abuse, and welfare? I want you to take a moment to pause the video and think about what the definitions are of these key terms. So let's begin with safeguarding. Now, safeguarding is quite a broad term that refers to measures used to protect the health, well-being, and human rights of individuals, in this case, children and young people, to live free from abuse, harm, and neglect. So this might refer to schools ensuring that all their staff are DBS checked. This might also mean that schools monitor the attendance of all their students and highlight any students who might have really poor attendance and chase that up. This might include measures such as ensuring that all visitors on site are either DBS checked or accompanied by a member of staff who is DBS checked at all times. It might include systems involving certain parts of the school that is closed off and can only be accessed with an ID card, ensuring that all staff and students are wearing ID cards is another measure. The whole head of year and tutor system that you have in school is another safeguarding measure that's put in place to protect students. The fact that there's a designated safeguarding lead or child protection officer and that there's a designated safeguarding team, in fact, is another safeguarding measure that's used and employed by schools. And obviously, most importantly, how the communication exists between teachers and other members of staff and the safeguarding team, and ensuring that that communication is very open, clear, and well structured. So what do we mean by child protection? So this refers to the activity that is undertaken to protect specific children who are suffering or are likely to suffer significant harm. So this refers specifically to the more vulnerable students and those students who might have already made a disclosure. When it comes to abuse, this is the NSPCC's definition of abuse. So it refers to the deliberate act of ill treatment that can harm or is likely to harm a child or young person's safety, well-being, and development. When it comes to young people under the age of 18, abuse can be physical, sexual, or emotional. Neglect is also another type of abuse, and it can be defined as failing to provide or secure for a child or young person the basic needs of physical safety and well-being. Please remember that abuse may not fall easily into these categories. Abuse can come in all different shapes and forms and therefore is dealt with on a case-by-case basis. So what do we mean by welfare? So welfare refers to the efforts designed to promote the basic physical, emotional, mental, and material well-being of people in need. So this is slightly different to the safeguarding measures that are put in place. The safeguarding measures are more formal. So some of the efforts to promote the welfare of young people in schools might be trainings on behaviour management and how to manage the behaviour of students and create safe environments for young people, how to teach about sensitive topics. Building positive relationships with students is another effort to promote welfare, and things like student voice. All of those are examples of ways that schools try and ensure that the welfare of young people is paramount, even down to curriculum design and what's taught in your lessons. So, in your opinion, do you think that safeguarding and child protection is a statutory procedure or a social effort in school? I want you to pause and take a moment to think about the answer to this question and your reasons why. So what does the DfE say about the duty to protect? For those of you who said it was a statutory procedure, you are absolutely correct. The DfE says it's statutory to protect young people. It is our duty to do so. And it applies to all schools, every single one of them. Next question, who is responsible for safeguarding young people in school? For those of you who said all staff, well done, you are absolutely correct. All staff are responsible for safeguarding young people in a school. So this includes career advisors in the school, the HR manager, the canteen staff, the cleaners, and of course, the teachers. The DfE says that safeguarding and promoting the welfare of children is everyone's responsibility, and that everyone who comes into contact with children and their families has a role to play. In order to fulfill this responsibility effectively, all practitioners should make sure their approach is child-centred. This means that they should consider at all times what is in the best interest of the child. If you'd like to do some more reading into safeguarding, here are some documents published by the DfE, the Department for Education. And I'd say that these are a good starting point when it comes to safeguarding. So you've got the Keeping Children Safe in Education updated in 2022 in response to COVID-19 and the lockdown. And the other document is Working Together to Safeguard Children, July 2018, that looks at multi-agency work and how schools work with other agencies to ensure we safeguard and protect our young people. So moving on to why we should safeguard our young people in school. Now, I highly recommend this TED Talk by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. So literally, if you go onto Google and just type in ACEs, Nadine Burke-Harris TED Talk, this will come up. I think it's about a 16-minute video, but I highly recommend you watch it. It was based on a study that was conducted in the 90s about adverse childhood experiences. This can include having a parent who's in prison, experiencing abuse growing up, having your parents separate or divorce, etc. And the findings were quite shocking. Exposure to ACEs dramatically increased the chances of 7 out of 10 of the leading cause of death in the USA. They found that exposure to adverse child experiences can also impact on brain development, immune system, hormonal structures, as well as how DNA is read and transcribed. And they also noticed a 20-year difference in life expectancy. In fact, they noticed that those participants who had 4 or more ACEs scores were 2.5 times more likely to have certain heart issues, 2.5 times more likely to have hepatitis, 4.5 times more likely to have depression. They also found that those who had 7 or more ACEs were more likely to have lung cancer, and again, more likely to have coronary heart disease as well. So really, really interesting video about the impact that adverse childhood experiences can have on people as they grow up. So worth watching, definitely worth watching. We're continuing on with why should schools safeguard their young people? As mentioned, protect them from abuse and maltreatment. Abuse and other forms of adverse childhood experiences not only increased risk-taking behaviour among young people, but it also impacts to a range of health issues that I outlined on the previous slide. It also prevents harm to the health and development of that young person. It provides safe and effective care as students grow up. Remember, you're going to be seeing these young people all the way from year 7, potentially up to year 13. That's the age of 11 up until 18, into the early stages of adulthood. And ensuring they have that care, a safe environment for their health and their development is vital. In fact, progress is another reason why there is a growing wealth of research that shows that if young people are happy, healthy, and safe in school, they're more likely to get better results and better outcomes in school when it comes to progress and achievement. And finally, while students are at school, we are given the sort of parental responsibility during that time in school. And for many young people, school is a safe space for them. And it's where they spend most of their day. And especially if the abuse is taking place at home, school is that safe haven. So as a school, we must take on some of the functions and responsibilities of a parent. And our final reason why schools should safeguard their young people is the big O word, Ofsted, of course. So for those of you who aren't aware, Ofsted have recently changed their framework, and a huge part of it goes to personal development and how we ensure that those young people are staying healthy and safe. So safeguarding falls into that personal development area, and on a more formal level falls into leadership and management, making sure there's the formal procedures in protecting those young people, ensuring that they are kept safe. It also does fall into behaviour. Ensuring that there is positive behaviour in the classroom and around the school means that young people are safer, young people are in a safer environment to disclose if they need to, etc. So there's a big focus on safety of young people. What is very important to note is that a school's overall effectiveness will be judged inadequate or will require improvement if safeguarding is found to be ineffective. So even if teaching and learning is absolutely fantastic in a school, if there's safeguarding procedures and the way in which they promote the welfare of young people in that school, if those are found to be inadequate, the school overall will be judged as requiring improvement. So there's lots of reasons why safeguarding is so vital in schools for our young people. Right, so if you'd like to do a bit more reading, I would highly recommend the NSPCC's report. It's a very important read to get your head around, to understand what Ofsted means by safeguarding. Obviously, there are the traditional types of abuse that exist, such as neglect, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse. But it's important for staff to also understand the other safeguarding issues that also exist. So things like upskirting or pair-on-pair violence, or issues around racism, disability, or homophobic, transphobic abuse, forced marriage, FGM, substance misuse, etc. So there is a list on this slide of various safeguarding issues that might not fall under the traditional definition of abuse that we need to be aware of as staff. And like I said, please do read through this briefing. I don't believe it's a long document, so please do have a read of that. I will provide links to all these materials at the end of this training. So how should a school be safeguarding their young people? So according to the Children's Society, it's about creating a safe environment for children and young people through robust safeguarding practices. So this is putting in place clear procedures that staff can follow and students are made aware of. But it's also about how in classrooms we're creating safe environments when we're teaching about sensitive topics. Secondly, it's by ensuring that adults who work in the school, including volunteers, don't pose a risk to children. So again, this is through DBS checks, updated DBSs, and making sure that volunteers and visitors either have a valid DBS or are escorted and accompanied by staff who do. Thirdly, making sure staff are trained, know how to respond to concerns, and keep up to date with policy and practice. Fourthly is about teaching children and young people about keeping safe. So a lot of this falls into PSHE. And finally, by maintaining an environment where children feel confident to approach any member of staff, a trusted adult in the school, if they have a worry or a problem. Again, this is through robust communication channels between staff and the designated safeguarding team, but also making sure that the school's ethos and culture is about relationships and having positive behaviour management, for example, and being able to build those relationships, and working on that is a way in which we can ensure that young people feel safe enough to speak to any member of staff in the school and make those disclosures in a safe manner. So we're going to move on to the different signs of abuse. this can be quite triggering for certain people. So if at any point you want to pause the video, you just want to have a breather, you want to revisit it at a later time, please do feel free to do so. So obviously this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some examples. Now, as a PE teacher, for example, you might be able to notice more of these than other members of staff. You might notice some of these during a sports day or certain events where students might be wearing a PE kit. Or as a tutor, you might notice, for example, something like the deterioration of health. Tutors have that pastoral role and have those relationships with their students. So they might be able to pick up on certain things that a student's teacher in a subject area might not. So all of these are signs of potential physical abuse. If any of these occur, I think it's best to report straight to the designated safeguarding lead immediately, as soon as possible, by email, through writing. Obviously, you need to draw upon the support of your subject mentors whilst you're on placement as well. So, feel free to have that chat with them and copy them into emails as well. You'll have lots of support in schools, lots of different staff in different roles that can support you along the way. We're now going to be moving on to different signs and symptoms of sexual abuse. So lots of different examples here, especially sort of injuries around the genitalia or anal regions or thighs, issues around STIs or bladder infections. Can I just add, when it comes to pregnancy, even if there is a pregnancy post-16, it's still important to pass that information on to a designated safeguarding lead. And the reason why is because we don't know how that young person is responding to that pregnancy, the difficult decisions that they might have to make in response to it, how family might be dealing with that pregnancy, or if they've even been told. And there's so much more when it comes to a young person being pregnant that we need to consider as a school to ensure that young person's safe and making sort of safe and informed decisions. So even if it is a post-16 pregnancy, it's still very important to pass that information on to the designated safeguarding lead. But if it's under the age of 16, then that is obviously raises certain alarms, because the age of sexual consent here in the UK is 16. Another example is proactive and inappropriate sexual behaviour. So this could even be in the form of someone like a year 7 student being very sexually explicit, where you have that gut feeling that they might be exposed to pornography or some sort of sexual abuse potentially, and pass that on. Because it could be a sign of something more sinister. Self-harming, refusal to undress in front of others, all these things are, again, some examples of potential sexual abuse. And you need to pass that information straight on to the designated safeguarding lead. And like I said, please do draw upon the support of your subject mentor as well. So what are the signs and symptoms of emotional abuse? This one's a bit more complicated because emotional abuse is much harder to detect. So you might see things like reluctance from the individual to be around specific people, like parents or carers, being overly affectionate to strangers, lack of confidence, severe anxiety, aggression towards others, not being allowed to voice an opinion, and disturbed sleep patterns. And I wouldn't say that one of these would indicate emotional abuse. It would have to be a few of these, and you'd have to use your judgment as well. Obviously, something like severe anxiety is quite significant. So that's something you might want to pass on, because that's a mental health issue. When I'm talking about passing this information on, this is your training year, and please do draw upon the support of your subject mentor and speak to them about any disclosures that might come up too. And they will be able to help you and guide you with what you can do. So the signs and symptoms of neglect, again, another area that is much, much harder to detect. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a few examples, but someone with low self-esteem may not automatically be experiencing neglect. So just bear that in mind. There'd have to probably be a few of these to suggest neglect. In my experience, I've found that things like poor personal hygiene and constant hunger seem to be the most obvious forms of neglect. It is quite obvious when you see students wearing quite dirty uniforms, or smelling like they haven't washed, for example, or constantly feeling hungry or not having eaten lunch or breakfast, and they will tell you that they haven't had breakfast or they haven't had lunch and so on. So things like that, just being aware of it, and again passing that information on. Abuse of alcohol or drugs, that should immediately be passed on. It's not just a suggestion of neglect and so on. That in itself is something that should be passed on. Right, so we're going to be finishing off by looking at other areas you might want to consider and think about is spotting injury. So self-harm, domestic abuse, pair-on-pair abuse, covering up in hot weather. Now, be wary of this one, because some young people might cover up in hot weather because they might have sort of body image issues. They're going through puberty, they're facing lots of changes, body changes, so they might feel not so confident. So that might be the reason why they're covering up in hot weather, and it might not be an issue of self-harm, neglect, or physical and sexual abuse. So just bear that in mind. Don't jump to the immediate assumption that is abuse. But again, if there's a number of signs alongside covering up in hot weather, then something worth addressing. Severe change in mood, behavior, attitude beyond ordinary from a student. Okay, so that can happen, and that usually indicates that something's happening at home or at school, and they're struggling to deal with that. So it's worth sort of looking into that, whether you have a conversation with that student and just say, how are you doing? How are you keeping? Or again, drawing upon the support of the subject mentor, but also you've got, when you're on your placements, you'll be taking over classes from other teachers. So maybe speak to that original teacher and ask them about the student as well. Things like grades and marks being hugely affected, impact on attendance. This is why attendance is such an important area, because attendance seems to be an area that is affected and significantly affected when a young person is going through a child protection or safeguarding issue. So registers, for example, are a legal duty, and attendance has a huge impact on attainment as well. Sudden change in beliefs and ideologies, which again, be wary of this one as well, because obviously as we work in secondary schools, we're watching our young people go from the age of 11 to potentially up to the age of 18. They will change their beliefs, they're becoming adults, they will question things, they will change their views on certain things and so on. They're discovering who they are as young adults. So just be wary of that, and don't make the assumption that it must be something more sinister. But also, again, the gut feeling, again, combined with other issues or other things that a young person might have said, especially if it's sort of violent ideologies or ideologies that don't promote equality and promote hatred and discrimination and prejudice, then obviously that's something to look into and chase up. So accessing dangerous and harmful websites. Another one is age gap between a student and who they are dating or their romantic partner. Again, we're thinking about sexual consent and the age there, but we're also thinking about the potential of exploitation. So that's another area. If a student mentions that to you, you might want to think about and draw upon support and chase up. As we all know, our students are young people. Parents and carers will control elements of their life, in fact, most elements of their life. However, there might be certain areas that are a bit worrying or raises some concerns. And it might be things like a parent isolating that young person from their support network, or monitoring a young person's activities closely, or they name call and humiliate their child, or they try and turn others, such as teachers, against that young person. So if you see this during parents' evenings or during communication through phone or email, then it's something that you might want to raise, again, with a subject mentor, again, with another member of staff who can support you with what actions you can take. Just a note, keep an eye out for the vulnerable group of students. So by vulnerable, I mean your students who have special educational needs and disabilities, your looked after children who are in care, for example, and also other young people in that class who might be facing certain issues and so on at home. So what is quite wise is, once you get your class list and you know who you're teaching, speak to the original teacher about each and every student, how you can support them and so on. You might want to also speak to the tutors of those students, because those tutors play a significant pastoral role in those young people in their tutor class. So To find out a bit more about the pastoral side, I would recommend you speak to tutors as well. So if you'd like to do more reading, I again recommend this, especially this document on advice on spotting signs of physical, emotional, sexual abuse, published by the government in 2015. So what are the national safeguarding priorities at the moment? So issues relating to COVID-19 and the lockdowns, this includes mental health issues. A lot of young people called Childline during the lockdowns to talk about some of their mental health issues, especially because many of them couldn't access the support that they would have been able to had they been in school. Some students who are facing abuse at home wouldn't have had the safe haven and so on. A real sense of isolation, for example, and loneliness as well. And just, the attainment gap that is created, which has then had impacts on self-esteem and motivation, behaviour and mental health. Sexual harassment is another area that is a national priority at the moment. There was a report that was conducted, I believe, last year by the government. So it's very, very recent, very much on the various schools' radar as well at the moment. Extremism and radicalisation. You can look into Prevent Duty, will outline what schools mean by extremism and radicalisation. Child sexual exploitation. Gangs and gang violence, specifically looking at county lines. Female genital mutilation, forced marriage, and family-based so-called honour-based violence. Parent-on-parent abuse, and promoting positive mental health, recognising when young people are struggling and putting in early intervention. Again, here's some more reading. You might want to read through the study that was conducted last year, 2021, on sexual harassment in UK schools. It was conducted by the government, and it's their research into it, and provides lots of advice to schools on how to tackle the issue. In 2017, a study was conducted by UK Feminista and the NEU, so lots and lots of interesting data in that, and lots of information to support. In terms of Prevent Duty, here is 2019's updated in 2019's guidance by the Home Office on Prevent. You might also want to read through the relationships and sex education and health education statutory guidance as well. You might also want to read into the NSPCC report on what children are saying to Childline about coronavirus. So this was data taken from the 21st of January 2020 to the 8th of April 2020, where Childline delivered 2,209 counselling sessions to children and young people, and the main sort of concerns they raised, which was all around mental health issues, family relationships, schoolwork and bullying. So if you want to know more about the impacts of COVID-19 and lockdown, please do have a read of this report by NSPCC. You might also want to have a read of this document here, How Safe Are Our Children in Children 2020? It's interesting to have a read through some of the impacts on safeguarding issues due to COVID and lockdown. Right, so moving on to if you have concerns about a young person. So this is what you should do if you do have a concern about a young person, is firstly act immediately. Secondly, follow the school's child protection policies. So again, you'll get training on this when you start on your placements, and speak to your designated safeguarding need or a member of SLT if they are not available as soon as possible. Again, if you are unsure about an issue and you just want to sort of ask someone for support before you act, speak to your subject mentor. However, if it's something that's clearly a safeguarding issue, there's no doubt about it whatsoever, please just get in touch with the DSL as soon as possible. What the DSL may then choose to do is manage any support for the child internally. So they might use the pastoral support to help that young person. They might do an early help assessment and carry out an initial investigation by collating concerns about the student from within the school and externally. Or they might make a referral to other support services. So the local education authority, channel for instances related to radicalisation or extremism, CAMS for any issues related to mental health, or social services or police. So when it comes to FGM and radicalisation, there is additional information you need to know. So when it comes to FGM, if a staff has concerns about FGM, female genital mutilation, they need to speak to the designated safeguarding lead immediately. So where a teacher discovers that FGM has been carried out on a girl under the age of 18, they must report this to the police. So this is our duty as a teacher to provide the police with this information immediately. It is a criminal offence for FGM to be carried out on anyone, let alone a young person. If you are concerned about a student being radicalised, it just involves you following the school standard safeguarding procedure. But what happens potentially after that? Channel, which is an organisation that works with individuals of any age who are at risk of being exploited by extremist or terrorist ideology, they will be contacted and involved with that young person. Alternatively, the police. However, the police cannot treat the child as a criminal if a criminal act has not been committed. So if you have a concern or a disclosure is made, these are the things that you are not meant to do. So failing to act on the early signs. So like I've mentioned again and again, if you know for a fact it's a safeguarding child protection issue, a disclosure has been made, it's very clear that this is an issue that needs to be passed on to the designated safeguarding lead, please make sure you do so as soon as possible. However, if it's something that you might suspect, draw upon the support of your subject mentor, pass it on to a tutor, and see what they say you should then do. You might just want to pass it on to the designated safeguarding lead anyway, just in case, to cover your back, and to also make sure that young person is kept safe, because you're not causing anyone else additional hassle. You're not doing anything wrong by passing it on anyway. So please make sure you act. Okay, so what I mean by this is making sure that you keep a record of the discussion that you've had with that young person, or what you might have seen, and why you might think that this is a safeguarding issue and so on. Make sure you have all of that in writing. And when it comes to writing, can I just also add that when you are passing information on to a designated safeguarding lead, or you've had a conversation with your subject mentor or another member of staff about a young person who you have some concerns about, just making sure you have a written outline of that discussion, any outcomes that came of that discussion. And if you're passing on information to the designated safeguarding lead, making sure you email them and not just have a verbal conversation, but email them with factual information about the incident that has occurred. Maybe it's a discussion on what you've seen. Please make sure you listen to the views of the child. Don't ask any leading questions. Your job is to listen to what that young person has to say. We are not professionally trained counsellors, so we're not expected to have those sorts of discussions. So as I've mentioned here and reiterated, do not ask leading questions. Don't display strong emotions through non-verbal communication. So it's about practicing poker face, but also being supportive to that young person, being human. Once you have passed on information to the designated safeguarding lead or had certain conversations with staff members for support, make sure you reassess your concerns where the situation does not improve. So if you're noticing that the situation hasn't gotten any better, or they still seem to be displaying the behaviours you're concerned about, chase it up. Do double check that that young person's being supported. The designated safeguarding team will not tell you the ins and outs of what is happening with that young person because it's confidential, but they will let you know that it is being chased up in some way, shape or form. So it is about reassessing. You might even want to go up to a student. If a student's made a disclosure to you, it's one of the most significant things that they have done in their life so far, to open up and to tell an adult about something that might be so personal to them. It's really hard. So checking in on that student, in following lessons and just asking, how are you doing? Is everything okay? Do you need me to do anything else? Please do come and have a chat with me whenever you want to. That's fine to say, as long as you're not sort of pressing them for information, because that could trigger sort of negative emotions. but just checking in and being human, that's really important. It's vital. Do not share information. Confidentiality is key, but obviously in situations involving harm to that young person or someone else they know, you do need to pass that information on to a designated safeguarding lead. So here where I've written, don't share too slowly, what I mean is respond immediately. Like I said, keep information confidential. It's not the type of conversation you should be having with just any other member of staff, and you shouldn't be having those conversations with your peers on the course either once you return from your placements. There might be a teacher who might mention something that a student said to them during a lesson or at a certain time that you find quite worrying. So you are within your rights to challenge those who aren't taking action or might not be taking action in the right way. So in an instance where there is another member of staff who mentions something that you find quite concerning, please do also pass that information on as well. I just want you to know, before I wrap up, is that if you're worried about child protection and safeguarding and your duty and responsibility in relation to those things, I don't want you to feel worried at all. And if at any point you do feel a bit overwhelmed about it, I want you to think about a 90s R&B singer, Usher. And I want you to remember that number one, U is for uncommon. It is very uncommon that these disclosures take place or that you spot some sort of safeguarding issue. It doesn't happen all the time. So please do not feel worried about it. The S is for support. You've got lots of support around you. So please draw upon the support and expertise of other staff. Don't be afraid. There is support there. It's all available for you. You can even get in touch with me if you really feel you want to. My email address is on the PowerPoint slides. H is for feeling honoured. Those young people, the young person that is disclosed to you, they trust you. You are helping prevent danger to that child. And you should be proud of yourself. Well done, you. It takes a lot for a young person to open up and trust an adult with very personal information. And you've obviously built a strong relationship with that young person for them to feel that comfortable and safe enough to divulge that information. E is for experience. The more you work in education, the longer you work in a school, the more likely you are to face more disclosures or see more types of abuse. Obviously, being on placements, you won't be there as long. You're very unlikely to experience disclosures or spot any issues related to abuse among young people. And finally, R is for relationships. The more students divulge and disclose to you, the more it means that they have a better relationship with you. They feel safe around you. They want to talk to you. You are their trusted adult. And we need to remember that students spend most of their day at school and they need people there to show them that care, that love, that respect that some of our students might not be getting at home. So well done. If you built those relationships, those young people feel safe and comfortable around you, you should be proud of yourself. You should be giving yourself a big pat on the back. But like I mentioned, please do not stress yourself out or feel worried about this. This is a compulsory training that you guys need to have before you start in any school. But like I said, if at any point you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by the duty and the responsibility, I want you to remember our 90s R&B artist Usher, and just to remember these points here. Right, so creating a safe learning environment. Now I'm quickly going to whiz through this because I think it's very important for you guys to know, but I am actually creating a video going into much more detail. So this is just, again, just very short summary of how to create this sort of environment. It's really important that we ensure young people are making disclosures in a safe and private way, i.e. they're not just announcing it in a classroom to, other students and just blurting it out, because we know that those other students might talk to their friends and it might get spread around the school, and now the social media might get spread around, the world. And we want to make sure it's safe, it's private, it's with a trusted adult. How do we do that? And this is what we mean by creating a safe learning environment. So my first tip to you guys, every single subject area in some way, shape or form will be teaching at least one sensitive or controversial topic. So I want you to look at what you're teaching and decide what is sensitive, what is controversial. And whenever you're teaching that topic, I want you to imagine that one of the students in your class is experiencing this issue or knows someone who is. That is the best piece of advice I've ever gotten about creating a safe learning environment. I find that when I use that technique, what it does automatically is it changes the way I might structure a sentence, or it changes the way I might say something. I'm automatically more sensitive to my young people about the topic, because I'm literally imagining that someone in my class is experiencing it. I want you to examine your resources. Look at the content of your resources. Do they trigger negative emotions? Do they re-traumatize students? So for example, I remember teaching a year 7 student. This was in the early days. I didn't know enough about safe learning environments. And I did a lesson on smoking. And obviously there was pictures of like the dark, blackened lungs with tar all over them. And it made a year 7 student very sad. She started crying in the class. And when I spoke to her, she told me that her dad smokes a lot of cigarettes and has done for a long time. And she just visualizing the fact that that could be her dad's lungs, and that he could get really ill, really upset her. So I knew that that picture might not have been necessary. Examine your own language and behavior. So the pedagogy when you teach. Ensure you distance your language whilst also ensuring your language doesn't other certain students or groups of students. So think about when you're using terms like we and us, because not all students will identify with what you're suggesting those young people identify with. So for example, I remember observing a citizenship lesson, and a teacher kept on saying that we've left the EU whilst teaching about Brexit. And a student put up their hand and said, I don't like it when you refer to the UK as we, because I don't actually identify as being British. And so it was quite interesting to see that actually the language needed to be distanced. Sometimes when you use the term you, especially if you're teaching about sensitive issues and sensitive topics and you're saying you, and you might be saying you in a sort of general way, but a student who might be experiencing that sensitive issue might take that as something really personal, and that might trigger negative emotions. So that's what I mean by distancing language. And then on the flip side, you don't want to other students and say things like they and them when you're talking about, I don't know, people of different racial groups, different religions, etc. Because then it suggests that they're othered and they're the people that are sitting in front of you in that classroom. So just being very wary of your language and how you use it, especially when it comes to distancing or othering. And my final point around creating a safe environment is ground rules. So it's always important to have ground rules when you teach about sensitive or controversial issues. We have rules anyway. So things like listening to one another, or like putting up your hand when you want to speak. Those are just standard rules. But what I mean by ground rules are additional rules on top of those class rules that ensure that young people feel safe. So things surrounding confidentiality, strategies for young people not to make public disclosures. So I always tell my students that if they want to talk about themselves or a friend or their auntie or uncle or whoever, that they should always use someone I know. So someone I know, X, Y, and Z. And that way no one will know who they're speaking about. It might be a completely fictional character, or it might be someone they genuinely know. It might be them. So that's a good strategy. Not laughing at others. I make it very clear that all my students, some of them might know more than others about certain topics, and that's fine. But let's not laugh at others and demean others if they have a certain point of view or are unaware of certain things. How to support friends is something I cover in our ground rules. Another area is signposting any services in and out of school. So if you are teaching a lesson about HIV, you might want to, at the end of the lesson, make sure that the young people know where the local sexual health clinics are and so on. So I'm going to finish off there and guide you to some potential reading if you want to know a bit more about safe learning environments. So if you look at The Rise Above for Schools, Guidance on Learning in a Safe Environment, published by the Public Health England, it will give you lots of information there. And like I said, that I'm going to create a video on how to create safe learning environments later on in the year. So please do watch that. As mentioned earlier, I have provided you with all the links to all the readings and references. So please do refer to this when you do have the time. And if you need to contact me, then there is my email address. My name is Trishna Gautama. Please feel free to get in touch. If you have any questions whatsoever, send me an email and I'll be more than happy to respond. I hope you've learned a lot from this session. And as I've mentioned before, you have lots and lots of support in the schools that you will be placed in. You'll have lots of support once you do secure a job in the future. And I wish you all the luck with your course. It's going to be brilliant.